The bells of the exclusive Manhattan rooftop restaurant chimed softly as a sleek, impeccably dressed woman entered, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Heads turned as Elizabeth Hart, a prominent figure in New York City's social elite, strutted in with her typical air of authority. Known for her towering auburn hair, flawless designer outfits, and an aura that bordered on arrogance, Elizabeth had a reputation for turning any entrance into a performance. Yet tonight, she would encounter someone she hadn't anticipated, someone who would shatter her carefully curated image and teach her a lesson in humility she would never forget. Perched atop a high-rise overlooking the shimmering skyline of Manhattan, the restaurant was a crown jewel of New York's fine dining. It had minimalist decor, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased breathtaking city views, and an ambience that exuded exclusivity. The establishment attracted Wall Street tycoons, Broadway stars, and socialites alike. It was the kind of place where wealth and power whispered between bites of intricately crafted cuisine, where patrons paid as much for the atmosphere as they did for the food. Elizabeth breathed in the scent of imported candles and polished wood, a slight smirk of satisfaction settling on her lips. This was her world, where every waiter and staff member knew their place, catering to the whims of patrons who expected nothing less than perfection. Meanwhile, across the room, Maya Johnson, a young black woman in her late 20s, moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays and offering warm smiles. She wore the restaurant's standard black uniform, her dark, natural curls pulled back into a neat bun. Maya's presence exuded quiet resilience. Raised in Brooklyn, she had grown up in a family where hard work was a necessity. After putting herself through college with scholarships and multiple part-time jobs, Maya hoped to carve out a career in this city that rarely offered mercy to those who didn't come from privilege. Working at the restaurant was supposed to be a temporary stepping stone, but as with many in New York, temporary jobs often became indefinite ones. As Elizabeth settled into her table by the window, she barely glanced at the menu before dismissively waving her hand towards a bar. Catching the signal, Maya straightened her posture, brushing off the fatigue from the double shift she had pulled the day before, and approached with her usual gentle smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome. Can I start you off with a drink?" Maya asked politely. Elizabeth didn't look up. Instead, she scrutinized her manicured nails, then lifted her chin slightly, examining Maya with a raised brow. "I'll have a glass of your finest Chardonnay," she ordered, her tone dripping with entitlement. "And make sure it's cold. I don't care if it's white. I want it chilled." Maya paused, accustomed to unusual requests, but taken aback by the level of rudeness in Elizabeth's tone. "Certainly, ma'am. I'll bring that right away," she replied, maintaining her professional demeanor even as the sting of Elizabeth's words settled in. As she turned to retrieve the wine, Elizabeth sighed dramatically, loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. "Service these days," she muttered, shaking her head. "I don't know why it's so hard to find competent people anymore." Elizabeth's comment, uttered with calculated cruelty, caught the attention of a few diners nearby. Maya felt her cheeks flush, but she focused on keeping her steps even as she walked away. After working here for nearly a year, she had developed a thick skin, but encounters like this always left a bitter aftertaste. In the kitchen, Maya took a few calming breaths, feeling the weight of Elizabeth's disdain claw at her self-worth. She glanced at her reflection in a polished silver tray, recalling her mother's words. "Dignity is something no one can take from you, Maya, not unless you let them." Refocusing, she poured the Chardonnay with care, placing it on a new tray. When Maya returned to Elizabeth's table, she set down the glass gently, hoping to avoid further conflict. But as Elizabeth lifted the glass to her lips, her face twisted in mock disgust. "Room temperature?" Elizabeth hissed, her voice raised just enough to be heard by those around her. She shook her head, looking at Maya as if she were a child who had spilled milk. "I asked for it to be cold. Is it really that hard to follow a simple instruction?" Maya took a steadying breath, willing herself to remain calm. "I apologize, ma'am. I'll bring you a fresh glass right away. Oh, don't bother, Elizabeth retorted with a dismissive wave. I suppose it's too much to expect competence these days. She shot Maya a pitying smile, as if bestowing her with some cruel, twisted charity. Let me guess, you probably don't understand the kind of standards people like me have to maintain. Maya's hands clenched subtly as she held the tray, each word grating against her patience. She wanted to reply, to tell Elizabeth that she knew about hard work, that every shift in this restaurant was another step toward her dreams, but she held back. People like Elizabeth didn't care about backstories. They saw only uniforms, only people who were beneath them. Just as Maya opened her mouth to excuse herself from the table, a voice from the table behind Elizabeth's broke the tense silence. It was deep, calm, and carried a weight that made heads turn. "Excuse me, but did I hear you correctly?" The voice asked, resonating with quiet authority. Elizabeth froze, her hand halfway to her wine glass, and slowly turned to face the man behind her. Seated at the adjacent table was none other than James Carter, one of New York's most renowned civil rights attorneys. In his early 50s, James was tall, broad-shouldered, and his reputation preceded him. Known for his philanthropic work and commitment to equality, he was a figure Elizabeth instantly recognized. James locked eyes with Elizabeth, his gaze unwavering. "Forgive my interruption," he began, a slight edge to his tone, "but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with this young lady." He nodded towards Maya, his eyes softening when he looked at her. Elizabeth's face drained of color, her confident demeanor faltering under the intensity of James' gaze. "Mr. Carter, I didn't realize. I mean," she stammered, grasping for words. She forced a tight, nervous smile, clearly rattled by James' sudden intervention. James raised an eyebrow unimpressed. "What I heard was condescension," he continued, his voice calm but unyielding. "This young lady," he nodded towards Maya, "is here, working hard to ensure your experience is enjoyable, yet you seem to have decided she's less than you because of the position she holds." Elizabeth's cheeks turned a deep shade of red, her eyes darting around the room as other diners watched with interest. Her attempt to regain composure was met with James' steady, unrelenting gaze. "You know, Miss Hart, respect is a reflection of one's character," he said, his tone pointed but civil. "People like Maya here are the backbone of establishments like this. They're the ones who make places like this what they are, and I'd say that's something worth respecting." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of pride and validation that lifted her spirits. Here was a man she had long admired, standing up for her, affirming her worth. She glanced around, noticing the approving nods from nearby patrons, their gazes now filled with empathy. James continued, addressing Maya directly. "Maya, if you're available after your shift, I'd love to discuss an opportunity with you," he said, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "I run an organization that provides scholarships and career placements for dedicated individuals like you. We could use someone with your resilience, your dedication." 7 minutes and 43 seconds Maya's heart raced, her hands clasping tightly over her tray. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but blinked them away, managing a soft, grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I'd be honored." Elizabeth sat frozen, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find a response. The tables had turned, her own cruelty now exposed for everyone to see, and a feeling of powerlessness settled over her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She glanced at Maya, then at James, and her eyes dropped, realizing she was alone in her shame. James looked at Elizabeth once more, his gaze unwavering. "Respect goes both ways, Miss Hart. It's something we all have to earn, no matter our status." With that, he turned back to Maya, offering her one final nod of encouragement. The restaurant watched in silence as Maya returned to the kitchen, her head held high, her heart swelling with gratitude. Her co-workers greeted her with smiles and nods of respect, the weight of the moment settling over them. And as Elizabeth Hart left the restaurant that night, her head bowed, she carried with her the bitter realization that for all her wealth and status, she had missed what mattered most. True worth wasn't found in designer clothes or exclusive addresses, but in the simple dignity of treating others with respect. For Maya, that night marked a new chapter, one where she no longer saw herself as a mere waitress, but as a woman with dreams, ambition, and a newfound belief in her own worth. And as she looked back at the restaurant, her heart brimmed with hope for the future she knew was finally within reach. What would you do if you witnessed this moment? Respect isn't bought with wealth, it's earned with kindness. Share this story if you believe in standing up for what's right, and let it remind us all that true power lies in lifting others up, not tearing them down. Don't forget to follow for more eye-opening stories that reveal the real heroes among us, because sometimes the people we overlook have the most to teach us.